So our next presenter has spent over 2 decades improving the flow of work across organizations. He worked through tech support, IT management, build and release engineering, and as a founding CTO for enterprise SaaS. Is that correct? SaaS. He serves as lead consultant for Visible Value Stream Consulting, as a board advisor to the Value Stream Management Consortium, chair of the OASIS Value Stream Management Interoperability Technical Committee, and co-founder of the Flow Collective to bring flow-focused professionals together. Since 2017, he has been developing and facilitating flow engineering to make flow improvement in large organizations accessible, collaborative, and actionable. Please welcome on stage Steve Ferreira.
Thank you. That was a mouthful. That's a lot to cover.
Two decades, wow, it doesn't show. Title of his speech, Flow Engineering, Map and Measure Your Way to Performance.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone who came out. It's wonderful to see you here. How many folks would consider themselves a leader in their organizations? Okay, excellent. So what I want you to take away from this is techniques and new thinking that you can bring back to your organization, whether you are currently leading, or that's an aspiration of yours, or you're just flexing leadership muscles in your role, trying to get to better ways of working in your organization. So that's my goal. And when I talk about flow engineering, what I am... Oh, man. Nope, hold on. There we go. Essentially, what I'm talking about is getting things done. But more importantly, I want organizations to get the right things done. So we can be more productive, but if we're running in the wrong direction, we're just creating waste. We're just creating more distance between us and what we want to achieve. So flow engineering is really all about trying to get to the right thing. And in a lot of organizations, we're constantly distracted from what's actually going to make the biggest difference, right? We have lots of shiny objects. How many times have you heard AI today? It's probably maybe in the triple digits. That is not a good scenario for getting things done, right? There's a lot of noise. And what we want is signal. We want actionable insights, things that actually have an impact on the bottom line of the organization. And so what that looks like is when we're thinking about what actually makes a difference, we have lots of things in our organization, in a lot of cases, lots of low-hanging fruit that is not the latest tool, that is not technology, that is not changing what we're working on, but how we work. And flow engineering is really aimed at that how. So I want to introduce a story that I talk about often because I think it's a really great exemplar of what happens when we apply flow engineering. So very early into my consulting career, applying flow engineering, I don't think I'd even named it flow engineering yet. That's just a catchy title to grab people's attention. But I was just doing value stream mapping, and I was called into a very large organization. And what they wanted to do was actually make a case for automating their artifact deployment. They had a tool target. They basically said, we want you to help us make a case for adding this automation. It's going to cost a lot of money, it's going to take a lot of time, and we have to convince leadership to do it. But what happened was, when we looked at this in the context of everything that they were doing, it turned out that this was just a small piece of the puzzle. And when we actually measured the data of a typical flow through their value stream, we found 2 other opportunities in the flow that were slowing them down, that were getting in the way, that had 10 times and 100 times the impact of their current manual deployment system. In other words, artifact deployment was not their biggest bottleneck. And so if we were investing in that, we would have spent $20 million. This is the budget target that they had, because they were rolling this out across multiple teams. It would have taken training time. They would have spent 18 months implementing this. And what impact would it have on the bottom line, on actual lead time? 0. no noticeable difference, right? This is what we want to avoid, especially as leaders when we're trying to pitch other leaders, our teams, make good cases, and ultimately improve our careers. We have to be able to show measurable results, and we need to be able to do that quickly and effectively. So if we have a choice between low-hanging fruit that we can measure and prove has an impact on the bottom line, and some tool that may pay off in the future but relies on massive investment in convincing people, let's just go with the data. Let's look at what's actually happening, where we're actually held back, and then invest there. So that's the proposition of flow engineering. And what this means for AI, in a lot of organizations, your constraint is not the fact that you can't create more code, right? If we add a bot and we start generating a bunch of code, it's just going to run into our constraint, and it's also not going to have a positive impact on the bottom line, right? If we start opening, we break a dam, and all of a sudden a bunch of water runs into a reservoir that also has a dam, we haven't improved throughput at all, right? We're just clogging up another part of the system. So if we have a constraint where all this work is piling up, then downstream, the customers who are waiting, the business that's waiting, the people who are waiting for results are not getting them. And it's going to be really frustrating to tell that story of, hey, we're doing X, we're doing Y, we just implemented this tool, everything looks really cool, and yet the numbers are getting worse or they're not going anywhere. So this also applies anywhere that's not your constraint. Downstream of your constraint, if you have a choke point, it means that you're also not able to accelerate effectively, because we can implement all kinds of generation tools. Maybe we implement more effective testing. But if we're constrained, then we have less to test than we could, in which case making our testing more effective is also not going to have an impact on throughput. So what we want to do with flow engineering is really address these hotspots, these areas, these choke points where things are slowing down and they're having a meaningful impact on our actual throughput, what we can actually get done as an organization. Because that's what the organization cares about. That's what the bosses care about. That's what the customers care about. They're all waiting. And if we have these giant piles of work, then it's not only are they not getting what they want, but all that work is getting older than it should. We're not getting feedback on that work. So that's all risk. This is all risk and waste that we need to avoid. So by addressing the constraint, we can actually have a positive impact on what really matters to the business, and I think that's really, really important. So when we look at a typical organization and we're delivering value, often what happens is that in order to make that happen, we have to traverse the entire org chart. So we have to go all the way across all these divisions and departments, up and down and across, and talk to people and get approvals. And, that's all in the way of delivering an idea to production and getting feedback and learning and adapting and getting better outcomes. So we call this a value stream. In a lot of organizations, this is not something that's defined, right? How many folks in their companies have something that they call a value stream? Okay. And is it a term that everybody in the organization uses? Does everybody talk about value streams? Okay. So this is a challenge. I think this is a situation that we need to change over time, is get everybody speaking the same language, right? Because we're all working in service of delivering this value across our organizations, and we should all be organizing in service of that. But one of the biggest problems is that we just can't see this big picture, right? We can't see all the way across the value stream. And so what happens is we tend to micro-optimize as a result. And this is a big problem because if we think about this end-to-end flow, and we have our siloed visibility, that's where we take siloed action, and we micro-optimize. This is exactly the same thing as adding AI in a place where we're not actually constrained. It's not actually going to make things better, and it could make things worse. That's not to scare people, but hopefully that sheds some light on why we have this difference between what we invest in and what actually happens. And I think as leaders, if we want to have better careers, more fulfilling careers, and more of an impact on our companies, we need to tighten that connection between what I think will happen and what actually happens. And hopefully, more of the time, we're getting better results than we anticipated. But we can actually hypothesize those results. We can demonstrate them. We can sell those ideas based on data and better illustrations to have better conversations. OK, so what am I talking about with flow engineering? What do we actually do? A big part of this is value stream mapping. How many people have heard about value stream mapping before this talk? OK, great. Value stream mapping really is just about representing that entire flow of activity and then measuring it so that we have insights about what's actually happening. And we just collect a bunch of data that tells a story about how the value stream is performing. And the value stream map really just represents this in a way that we can all have a productive conversation, point to things, or shift our focus. We can measure different opportunities against each other. We can also dive pretty deep with this, and I'll show you a couple of examples of this. But this is all really to give us, oh, I skipped way ahead. So it's all really to give us focal points, right? We can't improve everything in the system all at once. That'll actually work against us. We'll get nothing done. And the more we divide our focus, the less we get done. So we need to be able to effectively prioritize things, take an entire flow of activity and zero in on what we think is going to make the biggest difference on whatever our goal is. And that could be quality improvement. It could be throughput. It could be time to feedback. Oh, thanks. Thanks, add-on. Great timing. Pardon me. Hold on 1 second. I can fix this. It's not my first rodeo, even though it might seem that way. Let's see if that works. Great. OK. So what we want are these focal points. So we can have great conversations about let's focus on bottleneck one, or let's divide and conquer. We'll work on one. We'll work on the other. We have a hypothesis about how much we can improve this cycle time or whatever the metric that we're tracking is. I'll show you how that comes together. But one other thing that I think is a major benefit of this is that we have business folks and we have tech folks. And they don't often see things the same way. They don't often have productive conversations, right? How many folks feel some friction in their businesses between the tech folks and the business folks? Yeah, just a few. I think a map can be very helpful for this because when we represent what's actually happening and we put some numbers behind it, we can agree or disagree on the numbers, we can agree or disagree on the representation of the map, but we can come together and agree on where should we focus? Where are we going to see the biggest impact? And I think that's really powerful. So you might have situations, and I've seen this many times in the past, where the business folks can start to understand, I understand what you're saying about capacity, about getting poor requirements upstream, where you're constrained by testing environments that are broken. And then on the tech side, you can have a good conversation about, I understand that you have this strategy that we need to execute on. We have aggressive targets that we should be measuring towards. We need throughput so that we can get tests out the door and understand whether we're headed in the right direction. But that can be a much more productive conversation when we're looking at the same picture. But even beyond that, a single focal point in that picture, I think, is really, really powerful. This saves a lot of time and prevents people from talking past each other. So some of the things that we see as a result of flow engineering, unsurprisingly, is that we see improvement in flow. But improvement in flow is just another outcome. And what it requires is actually understanding things clearly, having a clear picture of what's currently happening and where we should be investing our time. And for that to happen, we have to have a clear target. We have to understand what is important to us. Because we can't understand things without filters, right? We can't just process all the information that's available. It's a bunch of noise. The difference between signal and noise is value, right? It's what's important and what's not important. So we start with identifying value. We start with setting a target. Then we use that target to manage our scope. And then we use that manageable scope to understand what's going to make a difference in throughput or quality or whatever it is that we set our sights on. And we can set any target with flow engineering. OK, so what do we do? What does it actually look like? it's a sequence of mapping activities starting from that identification of value, and then we build our sense of clarity, and we eventually enable flow by designing a future state. So we create a roadmap of actions that's based on a design of our system of work that addresses all the concerns and opportunities that we've identified throughout the process. Right? So each map builds on the next map. And you could skip them if you wanted. You could use flow road mapping from the start if you knew exactly what you wanted to do, and you just need to make a roadmap. But if you don't, or you know and not everybody else knows, or you need to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, then you can go all the way back as far as you need to go, which I suggest is starting from an outcome map, and I'll show you why. Okay, so who's a part of this process? We have value streams. So if we think about a value stream for building and deploying and releasing a mobile app, producing a mobile application, right? The sequence of activities that produces your mobile app, then of course we have someone who has the power to say, yes, let's do that. Here's some budget, here's some time, something that enables us to make progress. So a key sponsor is very important for this. And we can effectively bring that person in by having a clear plan of action, right? And very clear artifacts. So this involving of key sponsors is actually easier with flow engineering because you have something that you can show them that people often want to know, what are we doing? What does this look like? Who does this? What's the process? So you can give them something very clear and concrete and comprehensive. Helps to have a facilitator. You probably have facilitators inside your organizations. They might not know anything about flow engineering, but if they can run a workshop or they can run a board game, they could probably run a workshop for flow engineering. It's important to have a facilitator because there are politics potentially involved in this. There are feelings and perspectives and different roles coming together. So it helps to have an arbiter of that, someone who is not part of the value stream, to be a facilitator of the process. But then what you also want is representation. You want these perspectives from across the value stream. That helps you build the picture, that helps you get the data, that helps you bring everything together. And you're building it with these people so they feel like they are a part of what you're creating. That's really important. So I mentioned the maps. We're going to go through every single map, God willing, unless I run out of time. So we start with outcome mapping, and I'll really quickly show you what that looks like. Essentially, what we want to do is just take the temperature of the current state. We start with discovery. What is happening right now? And happening is, what are our pains? What are our goals? What is the context of our situation? We could have a number of different things floating around that people are concerned about. And unless we acknowledge those things, then people are going to be less engaged than they could be. They might not be as involved as they might be. And we also want a big picture view that allows us to zero in on that value that matters the most. Have good discussions about, is this really where we should focus? And this isn't a super consequential discussion because we're talking about 3-6 months in the future. We're not making giant bets with this. These are small bets to make meaningful improvements in performance, but they don't have to be super consequential. We still want to know what's happening, right? So we can have a good discussion based on all this raw material, but we can also affinity map this stuff, right? So we want to go from noise to signal all the time, and then distill that signal down into clarity. So we can affinity map things to understand, what are we really talking about? We have a lot of things. We're talking about generative AI over here. We're talking about app migration over here. What do we want to focus on? So we can, again, distill and focus. All of this is just focus. The whole activity is focusing on what's going to make the biggest difference to our performance. So once we have that, we can distill out of that a target outcome. What are we going to do in the next 3 months? And we'll do that thing, we'll get there, and then we'll monitor for 3 months, and then we'll reassess, right? We'll set another target. And we can do this more rapidly, but this is a great cadence because most teams are not doing this at all. So going from 0 to 1 is pretty meaningful. A lot of folks talk about, when should we do this? How often should we do this? You should do it once and see how it goes. And then you can think about how often you want to do it. So we have our target outcome, but we don't just take that and run with it. We want to understand, and we want the team, the working group to understand, why is this important? Especially because often these people aren't working on the same team. So we want to understand, what's in this for you? Is this actually worth your participation? Because you may not be directly benefiting, even though you may be indirectly benefiting. So let's figure that out. Let's get everybody bought in. And then we want to understand what's going to stop us, what's going to hold us back, right? So we talk about obstacles and then next steps. And there's different ways of doing this. People will do this with impact mapping. People do this with different techniques. You don't have to use outcome mapping, but I would love for everyone to set clear targets before they start doing things. I think it's really important. So we start with this clear target, a clear understanding of where we are, and then we look at what is currently happening in our system. How do we currently get things done? How does that perform? Where does it break down? Where does it get tough? So this is part of our building clarity. And people often ask, how do we find these value streams, right? If we don't have them currently, where are they? Are we sure we have the right ones? And I would say that you have a value stream anywhere that you are delivering value today, right? How does value actually get to your customers? You can look backwards from that. How does that happen? And what happens before that? And what happens before that? And you get your value stream. So even if they're undefined today, you can map a value stream because we work backwards. But some examples, there's lots of examples actually. They're all over the organization. You'll see them in things like platform development, but you'll also see them in things like hiring new employees because it's a process. Anytime you have a process that delivers value to your customers or organization, you have a value stream. Whether you want to call it that or not, you have a flow of work that delivers value. So you have an opportunity to use flow engineering. So once we have that, we build out our value stream map the same way. We trace backwards, and we'll look at all the activities that make up that construction and delivery of value, and then we add some data to it. So we'll commonly just look at cycle time and wait time. These are kind of like the most simple pieces of data that we add, but it tells a story. It tells us something that we may be a little uncomfortable agreeing with because we have to look at aggregations of data sometimes. Sometimes we're looking at 85th percentile data if we're pulling it from a system. Sometimes we're looking at worst case scenario, best case scenario. There's a number of different ways that you can collect this data. But the fidelity and the precision of this data does not matter as much as the relative value of the data. And what do I mean by that? If I have a lot of activities that are taking hours, and I have one activity that's taking weeks, then guess what? The number of hours involved in the other stages doesn't matter at all because it's completely insignificant, right? We don't need precision to find outliers. It's very seldom that we have almost total uniformity, and it's very difficult to find a focal point. There's always a clear opportunity, especially when you're going from 0 to 1. If you've been doing this for 60 years and you're in a manufacturing context and you do value stream mapping just as part of your business, then you probably don't have this low-hanging fruit sitting around. But if you're in an organization building software, I guarantee you there's opportunities all over the place. So we collect all that data, we represent it. We want to understand the current state because it's our baseline to compare to the future state. And it's part of that storytelling of we found an opportunity, here's the ROI of pursuing that opportunity, right? We always assume nobody's going to give us budget for free. Nobody's going to say yes to everything just because we ask for it. We're making cases. We're making decisions and proposals based on data. So this is an example of what this could look like with a little bit more detail. We have things like rework represented. We have tools and artifacts represented. We have different roles represented. You can get crazy with the detail. You could add as much as you want, but there is diminishing returns to getting more detail or perfect detail to this because we don't need it. We just need to pick a focal point. So once we have our focal point, we can move on. And so this moves very quickly, even in really complex organizations. So this is a financial institution, their release process. This is a 2-year release process that cost $2 million to release a feature because they did large batches and a lot of other things that are very typical in financial institutions. But you can see here, there's color coding that's telling a story. There's lots of information. And what we do with that is we can shorten the overall cycle time. And there's a couple of easy opportunities to do this. We pull things out of sequence and run them in parallel. We get rid of some things that we used to think were mandatory, and now we actually don't need them anymore. We have options where things have been automated, or we could very quickly automate them. And often, just by getting people in the room, we can make really quick decisions about, should we really do this anymore, or should we do this? Should we combine these meetings together? There's lots of really easy stuff that comes out of these conversations, partially as a result because these people just don't get together on a regular basis, right? I always remember one of my earliest clients, he came up to me after we did value stream mapping. He said, I've been here for 19 years, and this is the first time I've ever seen our process end to end. And this is a project manager. He was in charge of the end-to-end process, but he never had a way to visualize it, right? Other cases where we went through value stream mapping, and people approached me afterwards and said, I've never been in the room with these people before. And these are people that they're handing work to on a regular basis. So this can be really powerful for that reason. So what do? We eliminate waste, we get faster delivery, we get all these effects from this. Sometimes they're measurable, sometimes they're not measurable, but they're all positive, and they're all extremely consequential to performance, to getting better outcomes. So one of the things that people often ask me is, well, I have hundreds of teams. I have hundreds of products, perhaps. Am I going to value stream map all of them? Well, hopefully, yes. Hopefully you understand how each of them is delivered, but you don't have to get massive improvements. What happens when we map value streams is that we find common issues, right? So when we find common issues, all of a sudden we have an opportunity where we address that issue, and all of a sudden we improve the performance of all of these value streams that depend on it. So if you think about artifact deployment, if we do actually invest in artifact deployment and we fix it in a platform that every part of the organization uses, we raise the tide for all those boats. So that's very powerful. So you don't have to map everything to find opportunities that improve everything. Okay, so dependency mapping, I might go really quick, but dependency mapping is actually just digging deeper into what is actually contributing to the constraint. What is actually making this hotspot problematic? So we dig a little bit deeper. And the one thing that I want to leave you with from this is we're only digging deeper where there's gold, right? If we find gold nuggets, we're going to look for a gold vein. But we're not strip mining the entire environment. So we don't need perfect detail everywhere. We only dig where we see opportunity. And this keeps it very quick. So each of these workshops is 90 minutes. And that might not be day one, but that's the target, because we want this to be easy enough so that people don't have to really work hard to justify it or schedule it or work it into the schedule. So we dig in, we find more opportunities, we find more insights, what's behind, what is causing and contributing to these challenging situations. And that gives us more insight for us to create our future state map. And the future state map is where we really start to design a better system of work. But it's essentially just highlighting all the things that we could do to improve performance. And for everyone taking photos, I empathize with you, but I do have to go really quick. You're going to all get my slides, so don't worry about it. You'll get perfect copies of everything. I promise. But our future state mapping really is just, what are we going to do to get the benefits that we hope to achieve in terms of performance of the value stream? So what we do with all these realizations, all these ideas, all these actions, all these experiments, hopefully they're all experiments, to improve performance, is we need to get them done, right? How many people have been in a retro where you leave and the last thing that was said was like, we'll try better next time? Because there's no clear action that's coming out of this retrospective, right? When you surface opportunity, if you don't act on that opportunity, it is waste. It's worse than nothing because people get excited and then nothing happens. That's terrible. So what we do with the flow roadmap is first we prioritize things, and the prioritization is essentially trying to find that nexus of easy to do and very valuable. And once we have that, we know what we want to do right away, right? So we plot that on a roadmap, very simple roadmap. You've all seen a now, next, later roadmap. But what's different about a flow roadmap, and something that I think is really consequential, is that we don't just want things to do. We want to understand, how are we going to know that we're headed in the right direction? How are we going to demonstrate that we're making progress and that we can tell a good story about what we've achieved, right? This is all about getting you promoted and making you look good and getting better results for the entire organization. So I want you to have a very clear narrative of, here's what we wanted to achieve, here's where we started, here's what we noticed, here's what we decided to address, and here's how we're going to address it, along with the timeline, and how we're going to measure progress, and who's going to own it. And that, to me, is an excellent brief, right, that you can send to a leader and not have it bounce off immediately as something that's useless, that makes no sense to them. So I don't want to set you up for that situation. I want to make you look really, really good. So the last part of flow engineering really is an executive brief that pulls all this together. But the important part about this is, I don't think things happen without ownership. I don't think they really effectively happen unless someone is driving it forward, or there's a point person, or there's someone who's wrangling it. In some cases, just dragging it over the finish line. But also, we want to be able to know that we're headed in the right direction along the way. So we have measures of progress, owners of progress. We also want to know who's going to tee up the next thing. I don't need to know the measures of progress for things that are happening in the future, not yet. But I want to know who's working on finding those measures, who's going to define those things, who's going to carry it forward. And I don't need to know a lot about later, because it's later, right? So again, we're keeping this very, very minimal, keeping it very quick. So how are we going to take this away? How do I want to summarize this to you? We start with, what do we want? I think it's very important for us to start with a target, start with something that we actually want to achieve. Because again, we need buy-in. We need people to show up to the meetings. We want people to be excited. We want to be able to say, hey, we want to do this thing, and it's going to be addressing our biggest pain point, or that mandate, or that OKR that we have. Or, we just had this new organization, we just acquired a company. Here's what we're going to do to understand their systems and bring them into our culture and our organization. You can have any target you want, but starting with a target means that you can start with buy-in and you can start with participation. We also know if we start with a target, then we can end with a target and we can see that entire loop of activity. So once we know what we want to understand what's stopping us from getting it. Why don't we have it today? But also, what's going to get in the way of us achieving that target? Then I want to understand, why is it in the way? Because I can't really effectively fix it unless I understand what's causing it. And then once I know that, I want to look at, how am I going to address all these concerns? How am I going to get to a better state? And then I want to understand what getting there looks like. How are we actually going to put the rubber on the road and start to make progress? So that's the whole end-to-end process in a nutshell. But again, you can use this all over your organization, right? There's processes everywhere. And I know people are allergic to the term process, but that's because our processes suck. Like, they're bad today, and they don't have to be bad. So the path to better processes isn't avoiding the term process or trying to avoid process. It's to just make it valuable and actually make changes that allow us to get value out of our processes and the things that we're doing. And that can happen all over the place. I've seen it happen with partnerships, with acquisitions, with new ventures, going into new countries. There's all kinds of processes involved. Even planning events, even planning your travel to a conference could be a value stream. If you do it enough and you want to get value out of that, or you want to optimize it. But you don't always have to be optimizing everything, right? We're talking about focus here. So we really want to just be optimizing the things that have the most value to us. And that's probably things like releasing our products or things that are holding us back as an organization. Okay, so where can you apply this, right? I told you you can apply it everywhere, but that doesn't really help you. That doesn't really help you pick a candidate. But one of the things that I think helps you pick a starting point is, where do you feel friction? Where do things feel harder than they should be? Where does it feel like it's taking longer than it should? And then also, where are people unclear? Where do people get stuck? Where do they waste a lot of time because they're wandering around the organization trying to find the right person? Or they can't get time on someone's calendar, or they can't explain something clearly. These are opportunities as well. And then where we are missing value, where it seems like we're doing things that don't matter, or we get criticism for things that we think are valuable, and for some reason the other party doesn't understand it. These are cases where we can bring our perspectives together and we can talk about something more specific. Okay, so a couple opportunities if you want to leave with a few ideas. I think where to invest in AI is very consequential right now. A lot of people are talking about this. Where should we be using AI? And I think if you're having that conversation without having a conversation about where you're currently constrained or where you currently have bottlenecks and problems, then you're probably just creating new problems by implementing AI, right? You should be applying tools and techniques to where you need a solution. And that can be indicated by things like, where does your lead time get bogged down? Where do you get stuck? Where do people really struggle? Then a lot of folks struggle with dependencies. How many people hear dependency on a weekly basis in their organization? If you're working across the organization, you probably hear that quite a bit. But this is another opportunity for you to disentangle this dependencies, understand them to a greater extent, or mitigate those dependencies. How many times do you hear folks talk about managing dependencies instead of mitigating dependencies, right? This is a huge problem. People think that dependencies are just things that we have to like grin and bear, right? But we can start to actually break them down and understand them and alleviate those dependencies. If you just got a job, or you want to get a job, or you want to get promoted, this is a great way for you to highlight the impact of what you're actually doing to improve the system of work, to get better outcomes. Improving throughput, improving quality, having fewer fires in production, having less rework, less severity one incidents. All of these are opportunities for you to shine using a clear program of activities that you can bring together a team and show leadership through. Aligning business and tech, this is a classic one. And then anytime you have a system that's not working, right? Whatever system you have, if it's not helping you get what you want, then you have an opportunity to step away from that and understand, how is this actually holding us back? What's not working? What is the impact on our actual workflow? And so you'll see things like, we're doing PI planning. What are we actually getting out of it? What's the impact of this? Are we getting more value out of it than the cost? And in a lot of organizations, what they realize is that they're actually not. But we can actually understand this clearly if we can map it out and we can have better conversations about where we're getting stuck and what the impact of what's not working is having on our results and our outcomes. So that's it for me. I feel like it's a miracle that I got through all my slides. I'm sorry if it felt rushed, but there's a lot more information on my website, which is that guy. I was probably in the way the whole time, which I apologize for. Again, I'm going to send you all my slides, so hopefully not a big deal. We just released a course for folks who don't want to read a book or they want to do both. There's also an audio book. But Flow Engineering has the whole recipe set and all the context, all the reasoning behind this, all the boring details that you probably don't care about. But hopefully that gives you a great starting point, and hopefully you're coming away with something that you feel like you can actually implement, because that's my goal. My goal is to give you a tool to be a better leader, a more effective leader in your organizations, whether that's your role today or you just aspire to be a better contributor in your organization. So thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you coming out. I hadn't touched my water the whole time.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
Okay, everybody can hear me. Slido, let's take a look and see if we have any questions. Ooh. Well, Steve, Anonymous really likes you a lot. You appear to be designing systems, value streams around products. Org design tends to focus on capability, not a product. How can we design a system that supports engineering without being product specific?
Yeah, so capabilities versus products. Products and services are what your customers buy. Capabilities are what make those products and services compelling and valuable. So there is an order here. I think that if you're in an organization that speaks a language more about capabilities, a lot of people in the ITIL or TOGAF or classical IT organizations will talk more about capabilities than products. I think that's totally fine. I think we do need to be able to trace a path from everything that's happening to build and deliver and operate your capabilities all the way out to why you're getting paid. So I think it's a yes. To me, it's a yes and. Like, we're talking about capabilities along with products. But I think that the main takeaway for me is you have to speak the language of your organization. So if they're talking about delivering capabilities, then we can talk about how are those capabilities being produced and distributed and made available to either teams inside your organization to become a product or to be leveraged in other ways. I hope that answers the question.
How do you view VSM versus TOC?
Yeah, so value stream mapping versus, or value stream management could be, but I'm going to say value stream mapping versus the theory of constraints. I think that I run a very, very loose interpretation of theory of constraints with flow engineering. I think that there is a very powerful science behind the theory of constraints. And what I really want with flow engineering is just a focal point. I just want something that we can act on, that we can actually focus on to get some results. And it might not actually be the constraint of the overall system, right? I don't think that we often have the scope and the ability to really address the most impactful constraint in the organization because we have a sphere of influence and control that's smaller than the overall system. So I think, hopefully, I mean, I guess if I were to summarize that, I would say that value stream mapping can be a subset of the theory of constraints, leveraging the theory of constraints, but I don't think of them as like totally interdependent.
Okay. Complex adaptive systems can't define a future state. How would you handle this?
Yes. So just because we can't define a future state doesn't mean that we can't envision an improvement of our circumstances. And I think this is also a situation where we're not talking about a definitive construction of a future state. We can't create the future as effectively as we'd like to, but I think that we can design a better system of work, and that's the scope that we're talking about. We're not talking about state in kind of the network sense or really the complexity or systems thinking sense of state. We're really talking about what is a design of the way that we work that is better than what we're doing today. And so it's really not about that type of ultimate optimization as much as it is what's going to make our work better.
Okay.
Yeah? I
There you go.
that.
Got a fan there. He must be anonymous. Oh, where do
Nigel could be all of these. I could see all these questions coming from Nigel.
Where do you pull the data from in a cross-department flow mapping where a common tool is not in use to follow the process? It feels unreliable to go with participant statements because time is a tricky concept when friction is fueling the discussion.
Yes. Let me paraphrase that because I hear it a lot. how do you get good enough data when you have bad data in systems, you have bad data quality, you have data all over the place, and you don't trust the answers from people who have to give an answer about, it depends, right? Everything depends. How are we getting good data? So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. We can talk about what typically happens. We can talk about best and worst case. We can pull data from where we have it. But I only really care about precision or accuracy where we have value in that data. I don't need it everywhere. I don't need perfect data. Usually people already know where there's friction, right? That's the most powerful signal that I really need to do an effective job. But I think that what we do with collecting people's perspectives is the goal or the value in that is not in getting the perfect data. It's in highlighting the fact that we all have different ideas about how long everything takes, and we're really not on the same page. So that, to me, is a really valuable signal. And I can work with that, and we can all work with that. And the more we have, well, it depends on this and it depends on that, we're talking about variation that we actually want to drive out of the system to an extent, right? We want to go from high variation to lower variation to more consistency, to more predictability where we can and where it makes sense. So highlighting that we have a lot of variation is not a problem for us. We can just make note of it. We just have there's a lot of variation here, and I do that all the time. And we can start from that. And we often start there because if we're going from never doing this to doing it, we're starting from a mess. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start, right? Because we can go from a mess to better.
Okay. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Let's give a big round of applause again to Steve.